All right. Hey, guys. See a lot of familiar faces getting in here. Hey, Andy Partridge. Hi, Waldmans. And Jim. Hi, Bill Mitchell. Seeing lots of good friendly faces. Feel free to just post in the chat your name and where you're coming from. We love to say hi to everyone who's on here. Hey, Charles. Hi, Dale. Dana. Working my way alphabetically, as you can tell. Down the list. Hi, Eileen. Hey, Fred.
Okay, the chat's working this time. First time for everything.
I know.
Hey,
I
Grant.
see the messages. The messages are coming in hot.
Wow.
All right. Love all these
Okay.
mentions coming in.
That's awesome.
We'll
Great to see
give
where
it
everyone's coming in from. Hi, Linda. Hi, Lisa.
from the Outer
And
Banks. Beautiful place.
hi,
Yeah.
the various Marks. We have multiple Marks on the call right now. Mark Thompson, Mark
I
Rothschild, Mark Temple, Mark Reynolds. Got all the Marks.
Did you
I
say there was
think
a
Hi,
Mark
Polly.
Thompson?
Hmm.
We got to get
Yeah.
we got to give Mark Thompson, special privileges because of the last name.
okay.
We got Ruth here. I see Stacy's on. Hey, Stacy. Nice to see you. All right. Mark Colvin, Mark Frey, all the Marks.
Very popular name today.
Oh, I see someone shares my last name. I don't think we've met before, but nice to meet you. Glad to have you on the call.
First time for everything.
See the Stams are on. Hi, Victoria.
Right. So I'm just going to kick us off here. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Luke Dray, and I'm one of the partners and pros here at Muench Workshops. Joining me is Sarah Linson, another partner, and David Thompson, affectionately known as DT, as we call him in the office, and I think everyone else does as well. He's one of our pros here at Muench Workshops, and he's a landscape photographer with a particularly thoughtful approach to compositions and the quieter details within a landscape. He channels a lifelong curiosity of the natural world into his photography, which often results in rather evocative images, which you'll see throughout throughout this webinar. Today is seeing what others miss, and we're going beyond David's finished photographs to explore how DT actually gets there, how he moves beyond the obvious kind of hero shots and works the scene, experiments with different compositions, responds to changing conditions, and all of those wonderful things. Um, David, clients often tell us that you're a pro who really helps unlock creativity. And for them, since your own photography was something you developed after an early career, what is some of your most frequently repeated advice in the field that people can try out on their own when they're doing their own photography?
One of the things that I like to tell people is to really be patient. This photography stuff it's hard, but be patient. Um, Step outside of the box. Feel free to be creative and let your mind wander. And don't be afraid to try and experiment with new things.
Amazing. So we're gonna dive right in. David, where was this photograph taken?
This photograph was taken some years ago over in the redwoods. This is a classic scene that people want when you're going to the redwoods. You want peak rhododendrons, nice fog creates that atmosphere and depth within the scene. This is, I would say, is a classic shot from the redwoods. I feel like this is honestly one of my better images from there. Same thing here. This is on the Del Norte Trail over in the redwoods as well. Um, Man, this that curving branch. We got rhododendrons reaching for the light, foggy conditions. We got light beams. We have all the stuff and the things happen in this image right here.
And when people think of the redwoods and they're photographing the redwoods, is this the sort of picture that they usually have in mind?
Yeah, I think so. I think the mainly the conditions. I think the conditions are what really speaks to everyone. Again, here we got early sunrise light, foggy conditions. I mean, amazing light beams coming through the canopy of the trees. I mean, this again, this is like one of those scenes where you really, really, really want when you're going to the redwoods, and you got to be lucky with the conditions, right? Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, but um, revisiting locations is also important too to get the conditions that you want.
Um, And obviously, these two frames are very classic pictures of the redwoods. How do you stop seeing what you came for and start noticing what else the forest is offering?
Um, Again, I think that being patient and slowing down, taking your time to really examine, evaluate the scene that's in front of you. Sometimes it's behind you, sometimes it's to the side, and just really looking for the finer details within the landscape.
And this picture doesn't have those like shafts of light coming through the canopy like
Yes.
the previous photograph. What
Yep.
amount what about this scene really spoke to you?
So with this particular scene, when I'm photographing these woodland and forest scenes, I always like to look for arrangements within the forest. And with this particular scene, we have, I mean, just perfect spacing in between this rhododendron bush with the rhodies. You can see here that we have nice framing of the rhododendrons with the trees on the sides on both sides, and then there's proper spacing in between as well. So you have this nice depth going um, through the scene.
What I really like about this picture actually is you've got this finality along the edges of the frame here. You don't have
Sure,
really obvious tree trunks like coming out from the side of the frame.
sure.
Um, it's a really beautiful part of it. And then what about this picture? This is also in the forest and it looks like a very different place than before.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, believe it or not, this is in the redwoods as well. Um, there is a lot of hidden gems like this in areas in the redwoods, and again, just being able to step outside of the box, take your time, really look at the landscape in all its finer details. With this particular scene on the trail, I noticed that there was like these small maple vines and really nice ferns that were kind of surrounding this particular area. And the maple vines there with the dripping of the moss and you have like that soft light hitting the edges just really stood out to me. Separating the scene is something a little bit different, what comes with processing and, just again, finding that nice framing. You can see that we have the framing of those trees just framing that nice maple and it just kind of has its own shape and character. We have those ferns in the bottom just kind of plating us in. And one of the other things, Luke, that I really like about this scene is I like the different shades of green. So we have some
Mm.
warm tones in there, we have some cooler tones. It's all complementing each other in different ways. And you have that nice color contrast throughout the scene, creating that nice sense of depth.
And from one relatively primeval image to a really primeval picture, like what made you stop and
Yeah.
photograph this apart from that it looks like physical art?
Uh, and man, I mean, it's these maple vines. I've always been fascinated with the maple vines as they have this very chaotic and nice visual flow. Um, with these vines, I've realized over the years is that getting really close with the wide angle lens really accentuates those lead in lines into the scene. And then from here, it just basically comes down to like framing. Again, just using those lines, using the diagonals from the edge of the frame, just kind of guiding you in, and you just have this very chaotic scene, if you will. And I don't know, it always reminds me of some type of alien creature that's emerging from the forest when I see these maple vines. And if you can get those ferns down in the foreground and just kind of add another element of contrast and movement within the scene.
So when you're walking along the footpath and you're kind of moving through, there must be many of these around. How do you kind of
Sure.
narrow down which of these vines you're going to be photographing and spending time to photograph?
It really comes down to the lines. When I'm using the wide angle lens, I really like to emphasize the lines and the lines particularly coming in from the corner. Um, if anyone is familiar with my work, when I do photograph wide angle scenes, you can kind of see like a common theme. I like to use really strong lines in the edges of the frame to guide me in. So with this particular scene, there was other vines that were to the left and right, but it was just this one little section that just had the perfect amount of movement and coming in from the corners creating nice diagonals into the scene, and then from there just kind of picks up. Again, with these maple vines, you have the soft light that hits them, and they get that nice lime green yellow on the edge of the branches.
So you're really
I
looking at
want
shapes in those branches and the light feeding, like how the light is feeding through the
Yeah,
canopy.
absolutely. Because sometimes if you, depending on the angle of the light, you don't get that nice rim lighting on the edge of the branches. So that's one of the things that I really look for. Because again, you want to show off that drape, um like that tapestry of the branches of the moss hanging off, and getting the right light for that goes a long way with these scenes.
Yeah, these are incredible. DT, I want to pause you for 1 second. I've got a couple of questions in here, and I think they're all kind of in the same category around some of the
Sure.
technicality of how you get these shots.
Sure.
So I'm gonna work through them from the top here a little bit. There was a question about how much light you're adding in the post processing. So is this kind of how much of the light is naturally occurring versus is part of your processing afterwards?
That's a great question. One of the things that I like to emphasize, and when I'm out in the field teaching, and even when I'm working with people, is I always let the light dictate how I photograph the landscape and how I process. So, with that being said, I always like to feel light. When I'm in the field, I also like to look for light that really gives me that sense of I can feel light, that I'm looking into the scene and I'm feeling that light. Yes, there is some work in post processing to enhance that light, but for the most part, the light is already there, and I just bring that out with the processing. Another thing, this is a good example where there's darkness, there's light. So you have to go a little bit darker. For me, I like to go a little bit darker in the process and to accentuate that light and to bring it out to get that nice contrast of light and dark areas.
Yeah, I think there's a good question around this as well about how you're cropping and framing an image. So how much of these shots we've just looked at were actually kind of cropped in camera versus shooting wider and then cropping in your processing?
That's another great question. I particularly like to see my compositions with the aspect ratio in camera. So if you guys see images that I've done in the square crop, that's done in camera. I just like to really compose my scenes for what I'm seeing in that aspect ratio, whether it be, a 2 by 3, a 1:1, 5:4, 16:9, whatever that looks like. I always like to compose. Very seldom, very seldom am I doing props when it comes into post. A lot of times I'm just doing it straight out of camera, and just getting the canvas where I want it. Now, the caveat to that would be maybe in a scene like this where this is cropped to a 5:7. But other than that, I'm not really doing much cropping. If my camera had the option of a 5:7 aspect ratio, Nikon, um, I would do it. I would just use that in the field, but I prefer to have my compositions based on the aspect ratio that I'm shooting in camera.
Yeah, that makes sense. A couple other questions about what you're kind of doing in the field. So one question around if you're using a tripod most of the time for these images, and then also if you could walk through a little bit about the shutter speeds and apertures that you're using, the settings kind of for a lot of these images.
Yeah, so man, it's a got to break that down a little bit. I'll start with the tripod first. So for me, when I'm in the field, when I get to a location, probably 99% of the time I never break my tripod out. I don't even use it because I like to just study what's around me first before I even say, hey, it's time for a tripod. um, if anybody that's worked with me in the field, I always try to give them the same advice: just kind of wander around, look for stuff that is catching your eye, and then really start breaking down the scene in terms of composition, what the light is doing to the subject before we even think about the tripod. And then I like to see the image in camera. I might just look at it in live view. I might take a quick snapshot, depending on where I'm at. But again, I always like to walk around and study the landscape for its entirety before I even decide and settle on a specific image. Now, with that being said, during that time, then I can start figuring out what aperture I want to use, what focal length I need to use, what shutter speed, the what's going on with the landscape and the light, whether we need to focus stack or not. There's a lot of variables there. But again, that's the whole point of just walking around, taking your time, studying the landscape, and just getting the idea of what is catching your eye and where do you want to take it for the final image.
All right. There are a lot more questions, but we've got a lot more to get through, and we'll come back to them towards the end. We've got so much more to talk about as well.
Right.
Um, so all of these prior landscapes are slightly larger. How important is changing scale going from a whole forest to something much smaller and more intimate? And one thing I really love about this photo is the little clover lit up in the bottom left.
Yeah.
So take a moment to appreciate the clovers as well.
Yeah, this is such a cool scene. I took this scene on this last Redwoods Oregon Coast workshop that we did back in the spring, and I remember this particular scene. I was talking with one of our clients, Polly, and we were going through this whole process of breaking down the landscape and its entirety, right? So it doesn't stop with just seeing what's in front of us and to the sides. Also, we want to look down at our feet. And with this scene, it was really cool because you had these ferns that had this lime green look to it, and had that nice contrast against the ground foliage of the clovers or sorrel. And again, I like visual flow. I like movement in scenes when there's not actually quote unquote physical movement. So with this particular scene, you can see with that fern kind of curving off to the left, it has like a nice little curve to it. Um, and it caught my eye, and I was like, this would be a really nice scene to use as an example of looking at the smaller details. And that one little cover in the bottom left just gives it a nice contrast and a nice balance to the ferns.
And I think it's really important to note is that we kind of gone from the grander landscapes in the forest of the tree trunks all the way down to the bottom. And I don't think you've traveled a very big area to take all of these pictures as well, right,
No,
David?
no, not at all. All within the same area. Oregon coast redwoods. There's a ton of possibilities there, and just opening your eyes and just taking your time to look at all the little details.
So you try to make this flower work in the frame, but it doesn't
Yeah,
work. What isn't working
yeah.
for you here?
Yeah, so for me, this was on our first morning in the redwoods. We had amazing conditions. I mean, the conditions that you want when you go to the redwoods. Man, I noticed this dragon lily here that was really interesting, really unique. But I just couldn't get it to work and get it to tie in with the rest of the surrounding landscape, if you will. Such a strong eye catcher. And I just feel like the way I composed it in this particular scene didn't work and flow the way I would have liked it. But I still felt that there was some possibilities there.
Hmm. So, um, how did you take this photograph? Because it kind of answers Catherine Pro's question in the chat, actually.
Yeah, so I went back again. Like I said, I knew this dragon lily had a lot of potential. So I went back about 5 days later, and I tried to shoot it again the same way I did the first time, and it still wasn't working and had no fog on that morning. But I was like, you know what? Let me try something different. And I used my iPhone for this shot. Set my iPhone to the raw setting, got on the ground, rolled around on my back for a little bit, and man, I took probably about 100 different frames of this flower and try to get different perspectives to try to fill the frame, not get the edge of the flowers too close to the edge. And yeah, it took some time to get, but I think that kind of came up with something unique with the
So,
iPhone.
with the iPhone, amazing work. So,
Yeah.
Catherine, yes, you can use the newer iPhone 17 Pros, etc., to capture images like
Yeah,
this.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
amazing. So I suppose is this ultimately the lesson that finding something different doesn't always mean finding like going to a different place. It just means learning to look at the same place differently. Would you
Yeah,
agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that we have this vision of what our images could look like or could be. And, sometimes we get fixated on that, like I did with this first image, because the conditions were just so cool. But it just wasn't all the way there. Um, but again, looking at those details and going, let me just try something a little bit different, step outside of the box, be open with trying new ideas. And, this is the end result of that.
Amazing stuff. It's a beautiful photograph.
Thank you.
So those of you who have an eagle eye, we might recognize this photo from our webinar about editing with Joseph Roybal. Is this the kind of photograph that most photographers arrive on the Oregon coast hoping to create?
Yeah, this is that Bandit Beach. I mean, the sea stack here is just it's so prominent, it's so cool. It's a very unique and distinct feature of the Oregon coast when you see these sea stacks, and it's just so cool looking. And when you get the right light, the landscape really comes to life. Again, this is probably the best light that I've gotten on the Oregon coast. The light was amazing. But again, there's still a lot of possibilities out there that you can do, even when the light maybe isn't so ideal. But man, this scene here, I mean, just ideal light, reflections. I mean, a little bit of misty, hazy atmosphere in the background, creating a little bit of depth and separation with the sea stacks out in the distance.
Well, it's a beautiful photograph. But once you've made these and photos like this, what do you
Sure.
look for next? Do you turn around and look for something small, or like what is your process for finding unique images from a well visited, like a regularly visited destination?
Yeah. So what I'll do, I mean, I want the cool stuff too. I want all the nice light. I want all the stuff into things. But sometimes I also like to maybe turn around and look at maybe some of the smaller features within the landscape. Maybe I'll focus on sand patterns or reflected light on the sand. Maybe try longer exposures with the water and do maybe some ICM or some more abstract stuff. Again, I let the light dictate how and what I'm going to photograph when I get to these locations.
So you have this whole book of techniques in your back pocket.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
like this scene, for example, you had so many ways of photographing this particular scene, and there's so much
Yes.
going on. You could have raised the camera to simplify the foreground and remove the flowers, or zoom straight in on the archway. You can see this beautiful little arch
Yep.
in the middle of the frame there. What made you want to keep that busy foreground and build this sort of near far composition instead?
I mean, you just said it. It was that near far composition that was really me drawing me in. What I really liked about this scene, Luke, was the side light that was illuminating the flowers in that foreground. It was just nice and soft, not too harsh, but just enough to show the details. You have the other cliff sides framing the arch in the background. We have nice light in the back. We have this like just nice swooping line from the right going into the left, leading us right to the arch. Um, Focus stacking. This was a scene that I had to focus stack because of the near far composition. It was a little bit of a pain, but I think it worked out nicely for this scene.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Did you? I can see,
Like,
like in the pre. Oh, have you got a question, Sarah?
I have a question from Bill Mitchell that I think is really relevant to this. And he asked this actually back when we were in the forest section, but I think it's relevant here. He said, I'm always struggling with picking out a subject to anchor the scene and eliminate it. What kind of your advice in that situation? And then he was also specifically asking about focal length lenses to kind of how best to do that. I think that's relevant to hear we are talking about the subjects and how to anchor.
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Again, just really breaking down the scene, right? How can we tie this foreground in to the midground and background. And this is where, I always advise people to really take their time. No tripod, camera, moving it at different distances from the foreground. Go near, go far, go up, go high, maybe zoom in as well as Luke mentioned, just maybe to focus on the arch. I think there's a few different ways that you could have approached this particular scene. But I just really like the framing. You just have like this nice continual framing of flowers with the cliff sides framing the arch. There's just like this nice visual flow throughout this scene. And again, I think that just really taking your time and dialing in the composition first before we commit to, the tripod or, any other way, even if you're trying to do this handheld, I think just really breaking it down and seeing what works first before you commit goes a long way with how the image looks and feels.
Yeah, and
Um,
then building on that with just two quick questions that I think are still very relevant to this image. The first one was from Catherine. If you could just actually define focus stacking a little bit and just
Uh,
uh, and great kind of follow-up question to that, which is basically how did you manage to do the focus stacking in this image, given the wind on the flowers were likely moving the flowers?
That's a good one. So Luke, if you can use your cursor, just kind of just so they can see. So basically, when we do this focus stacking, we want to basically get our foreground sharp, midground sharp, and the background sharp. So what we'll do is we'll use different focus points within this foreground going all the way back into the background. So we'll have focus points on the flowers on the right, flowers
cool.
on the left. Then we'll do focus point for the middle of the scene, and then one for the background. Now, a lot of our new cameras will have the in-camera focus stacking where you can just set it and then it goes. I typically like to do all my stuff manually, which goes into your next question, Sarah, about the shutter speed and that kind of thing, just so I have more control over it. So if I want to just, you know, bump that shutter speed up without doing all the focus stacking in camera, I can just do it manually and just gives me a little bit more flexibility to play with shutter speeds and different ISOs within the frame. But basically, what we're doing when it comes to focus stacking is we're just using different focus points throughout the scene to get a sharp front to back image.
Amazing. Um, so this is also just around the corner, I imagine, not too far. When you made this
Yeah.
image, you saw the trees and the darkness around the edges as part of the composition rather than distractions that you wanted to eliminate. Like, how did you develop that way of seeing? And when you got there, how did you work out what to include and what to exclude?
Yeah, so I think so what I did here was this is at basically at a popular location along the Oregon coast. And I just, was like, what, let me just go up this little trail just to kind of see what's on, around the corner. Maybe 5, 6 minutes from the main, quote unquote, main area, if you will. And I came across this outcropping that just has a nice framing of this cool sea stack in the midground. And again, just really looking at it handheld through the viewfinder and live view, just kind of making sure I can make this work without, falling off the edge of a cliff to my death. But I made sure that everything I can do. I can do it in camera first just to kind of see what it's looking like. Then we can go to the tripod, set up, and then compose because we already got an idea of what we want to see because we've already seen it in the viewfinder and in live view. And then it's just a matter of just taking your time, getting your exposure the way you want, making sure your highlights are in check, making sure your shadows are good. Again, like I said earlier, where there's darkness, there's light. We have dark shadows, but there's still detail there. And it's just giving us a nice framing within the scene of the sea stack in the middle of the frame.
Did you bracket this at all, or was it just a single
Um,
exposure?
I did bracket. I ended up just using one exposure And
Okay.
I was content with it. But a lot of times I do end up bracketing in for scenes like this. Um, and just wherever it falls in the dynamic range of being everything being covered, highlights, shadows. Um, if it's all within the frame that I need, I'll just use the one frame.
And I think this image speaks particularly to how you don't always need to have an even exposure across the frame, and these dark
Yeah.
shadows create that
Yep.
beautiful vignette leading you to the sea stack.
Exactly.
And too many people try and you will bracket and end up with a really flat looking exposure. And this you need this shadow to create depth in the picture. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I will say this to all the listeners out there. One of the things I always tell people: don't be afraid to go darker with your image. Again, where there's darkness, there's light, and it just gives a natural feel. Our cameras can recover the shadows really well, so don't be afraid to go a little bit darker on scenes like this if you need to.
I think this is actually a really good moment to bring in Debbie's question, which is that some rocks in some of these images seem very dark without the details. So do you ever
Mhm.
open up the shadows on Lightroom, or are you just really leaning into that darkness? And can you kind of
Yeah.
talk just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I always lean into the darkness. Believe it or not, I know this is going to come across on some of you guys' displays as dark, but believe me, if I were to make a print of this, there would be plenty of shadow detail there. Again, dark shadows, not black with detail. Um, yeah, there's plenty of detail there. I wouldn't be worried about making a print of this if I needed to. I think that if you open those shadows up too much, Sarah, you start to lose the actual feeling, the feel of the image, right? This scene is backlit. So generally speaking, anything that we're looking at in front of us is going to have darker shadows, if you will. So again, I want to be able to feel those shadows. I want to be able to feel light in the image.
Yeah, and just there's a couple of great compliments of how they can feel or hear the image from different people who are
Yeah,
looking at some of these.
yeah, that's
There's
awesome.
one more technical question around these low light scenarios. So
Mhm.
Mike is asking, how many stops do you typically underexpose in these scenarios? Or maybe you can just talk a little bit about kind of, yeah, again, camera settings as you're capturing these.
Yeah, so when I'm in the field and I'm seeing scenes like this, particularly with backlit scenes, um I just like to cover the whole dynamic range. So a lot of times I'm exposing for the highlights first. And that could be, 3 to 5 stops. Um, Usually past 5 stops, I'm gonna have to do some type of blending because we start to lose detail in those shadows when we open them up. Um, Bit depth and that kind of thing. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion, but usually 3 to 5 stops I'm pretty comfortable with. Anything past five, I would say absolutely not. But again, I'm also a person that I don't let camera limitations limit my vision and my creativity. So if there was a scene that was just absolutely amazing and I had to go, 8 stops of dynamic range, but maybe I couldn't pull my shadows all the way I needed to. I rather still capture that scene with 8 stops of dynamic range and not have the others. Sometimes, light is fleeting, it changes quick. Sometimes we don't, have the time to, cover the whole dynamic range. But I don't let those limitations stop me from my vision and still trying to create my imagery.
I think there's just one more question on this, and then we can keep going. Which is, I think you're touching on this right now, but basically, how many adjustments are you making in Lightroom afterwards? So reducing highlights, adding contrast, dehazing for drama. These are questions
Sure.
coming in from Debbie.
Usually what I'll do with scenes like this, I always just try to start off with shadow recovery. So usually I like to come in a little bit flatter on the image. So I'll reduce contrast, I'll open shadows, open my blacks, bring down that exposure, and just try to get the detail in the shadows where I'm wanting. From there, I can build everything else up. All the color work that you see here, we can build up contrast. Building color is easy. That's really easy because again, there's so much information there in the files with our cameras. Building the color up is easy. That's the easy part. Getting the shadows to a point like this is where all the challenges come. But usually, I'm opening up the shadows, blacks, contrast, making the image pretty flat, and then building up all my adjustments going forward. Sometimes in Lightroom, but a lot of times I have to go into Photoshop to, get the image to this point because I just only have so much I can do in the raw with Lightroom and Camera Raw to get the colors the way I want it and the contrast and luminosity.
If you just to the people watching, if you go to our YouTube channel, Muench Workshops, you will see a webinar, our prior webinar with DT, or maybe the first webinar we did with DT. We talk
Yeah.
about this and we talk about how
Mhm.
David works with mid-tone contrast to make these beautiful pictures. If you have a look in the archive there, you'll definitely find it. Um, so when you first arrive at a scene like this, David, what are you watching for before you decide where the photograph is?
Well, with this seat, I was looking at the waves and I was trying to figure out a way that I wouldn't get completely drenched and soaked from head to toe with the waves crashing. This was over at Thorswell along the Oregon coast. Again, beautiful location. The well itself is it's awesome. It's amazing. But again, the way the waves were coming in that day, I didn't want to leave just like I said, soaking from head to toe. So what I did was I started looking at some of the finer details within the landscape. And with that wave action, I just noticed that there was so much cool water texture and these waterfalls cascading off the rock shelf. And basically, what I was doing is just breaking it down, just step by step. So you can see with the first frame that we showed, it's more of the wider scene. And then if you notice where the wave is splashing in the middle of the frame, that area there had a lot of cool stuff going on, and especially with that constant waterfall that was coming off the rock shelf. And if you notice, you're catching that late, warm sunset light, kind of going through the water, giving it this really nice luminance in the scene. So in the next frame, if you zoom in just a little bit, we just focus on that same area again, just focusing on the details. What we're doing in terms of composition is we're using the rock shelf coming in from the left, swooping into the right, into the middle of the frame. And then you just have like these nice overlapping layers. Again, a lot of cool wave action, a lot of nice texture, and again that constant waterfall that was dripping, that was coming off the rock shelf there. So take it a little further. Let's zoom in again and go into
One second, David. I
yes,
just got a quick follow up. So
yep.
obviously you've got beautiful like cliffside here with all the conifers on the side. What
Mhm.
made you want to zoom in and really dedicate the picture to the water flowing off the rock face?
That's a good question, Luke. Where all the action is at. That's where all the cool stuff is happening within the scene. When you look at the wider scene, we're just using again that swooping line from the left into the right, going into the frame, and then we're using that whole background cliffside of trees to create like this these overlapping layers within the scene. But all the great cool stuff is happening in the middle of the frame where that cascade is at coming off the middle of that rock shelf that had that waterfall, and that's where all the action was happening at. So I just was just drawing my attention more to that area.
To the action.
Yep.
I suppose that's the takeaway there.
Yep.
Now you're even tighter.
Yep.
How much of making this composition is composition, and how much of it is actually just waiting for the right wave?
It's both. So you're composing where all the great action is happening at. And again, let's try to get a little bit more creative. Let's go to the in-camera square crop and let's cut out a little bit more of the landscape so we can focus more on the details of the cascade and all that nice water movement throughout the scene.
And then what finally came together here to make this tighter composition work for you? Um,
Again, the cascade and the light, that light
mm.
hitting the water, just coming through in the middle of the frame is just so nice and just giving all the little detail. Um, on the rock shelf. You can see nice texture there. You have this nice contrast of dark and light from the rocks and the water flowing over. Um, it just has all the stuff and the things going on for me that I'm really enjoying. And just again, you're just simplifying the scene even more. So you can see just through the series of the images, we started off wide and we said, hey, let's try to go in a little tighter. Let's go even closer. Let's go even further. And you can see that it starts wide and it just goes into an even, tighter scene. And just really focusing on all the details and all the action and all the light within the landscape.
And when you're photographing moving water, there's been quite a lot of it in the last few slides. Like,
Yep.
um, what are your rules and your philosophy around slowing the water down too much versus and taking the texture away
Yeah.
versus trying to keep some of that texture in the water that's so important to show the movement of it?
Yes. Great question. So I don't think there's any quote unquote rules to this, Luke. Like I said, you let the landscape dictate and the light dictate how you capture it. What is the um, visual language that the landscape is telling you to capture? For this particular scene and the majority of the scenes in these frames, I like my water movement to be maybe from I don't know half a second to a second. Usually when I have big waves crashing like this, I like to do half a second, maybe a little less. Half a second usually is like the sweet spot. Point 0.3, point 0.3 seconds. That range is really nice because you capture that nice texture. You get the long streaky lines. You can capture incoming waves, and then you can actually capture the water pouring off the shelf as well, which you see here. And again, you're retaining that texture. No filters needed. Again, you're just playing with different apertures and ISOs. Get longer shutter speeds if needed.
All right, great. I think you addressed some of the question. We had a couple different questions about shutter speeds and filters and stuff like that. I think you've kind of covered off on all those. There's another question again about kind of how you're capturing this in the field. And obviously you're surrounded by a lot of water. It's a little hard to tell,
Mhm.
exactly where you are in proximity to this water and the rocks. How are you typically photographing these in terms of using a tripod versus handheld? Like, can you walk us through a little bit of also just how you're setting into the scene as well yourself?
Yeah, so same process. Again, before I even go out to, a spot like this with the waves, I always like to see what the waves are doing, how big they are, how far they're, crashing up onto this rock shelf here. Um, Compose it through the viewfinder, look at it through live view, and then decide, okay, this is a scene that we need to use a tripod because of the longer shutter speeds, and we'll set up and move around accordingly to get the scene to where we want it. And again, using those lines as visual flow into the scene.
Great.
Okay. Um, so this was just around the corner again, on the Oregon coast. And we've talked a lot about looking beyond the headline image, but finding an interesting subject is also part of that as well. The next sequence is something I really want David to show you because we're going photograph like frame by frame, looking at a sequence of images to see how the scene developed in the 2 seconds that David was taking these photos. You
Yeah.
actually tried photographing these patterns in the sea. This is seafoam on the coast. You actually tried photographing them the year before, and it never quite worked. What made you want to come back to the idea?
Yeah, so the sea foam, I think, makes such a cool subject for abstract scenes, because there's just so much like little details there that can make for really interesting abstract images. Last year, when I was on the Oregon coast, I had an opportunity a couple times, and again, just the composition just wasn't there to where I liked it and didn't really find the patterns within the seafoam all that interesting. What's cool about this next sequence of images is you can really see the thought process of what was going on. Luke, if you can go back one, please. So this is originally what I was seeing before I even came up with the composition. And the Seafoam, it has like a small current through it, so you have to shoot um, these scenes pretty quick. And all of these frames were all handheld. And again, just shooting this slight movement in the seafoam pretty quickly. So originally, I come up, I see the seafoam. I'm like, okay, cool. There's some nice bubbles here, nice water contrast from the white foam, and that's going to lead us into the visual flow. So going to go to the next one. And here it's just like, okay, now we can kind of start seeing the lines. In fact, you can even see my my reflection there. And but you can see the lines slowly start to make this cool movement. Next frame, Luke. So now what we're doing is now we're rotating the camera, same scene, we're just rotating the camera. And again, we mentioned it several times during this webinar about using the corner of the frame as your leading lines to guide you into the frame. So now you can see in this right corner that we start having the foam kind of start to take shape, and it's starting to have this curving action. And if you notice, there's like this, I don't know, formation of some sorts forming in the middle of the frame. Next frame, Luke. And now you can see that there's more foam coming in from the center right of the frame. And now you're starting to get like this more of this visual flow and this rotation and movement within the foam. And then the next frame, then now you can see now we're really taking those nice angles and wavy lines in the water and in the foam to really create like some sort of structure within the scene. And again, these are all within seconds of each other. Same thing here. And now you can kind of see there's like this shape taking form in the middle of the frame. We got nice lead in lines coming in from the right side, nice curve. We have this nice spiral effect going throughout the composition now. Next one, Luke. And there you go. That's the final image. Pulled some of the blue out with the color cast. Now we went more of a almost like a monochromatic feel to it. Dark light contrast. We got nice visual flow coming in from that right corner, and you can just kind of see this has this whole spiral effect. I look at this and it reminds me of some type of like bird head or a crow or I don't know, a pelican, something of in the bird family that has a long beak. And what's cool about these scenes is that with it being abstract, it's up for interpretation. I'm sure some of you guys will out there will probably see other figures and other formations in there that I probably didn't notice. But um, this was the end result of just really taking your time and just letting the composition just kind of come into place and not forcing it. Sometimes you just have to be a little patient and let those finer details and the movement come into the frame to get the scene like this.
So we had this whole sequence of images. We've spoken a little bit about the process, how the picture has evolved over time. But what came together in this final frame that made you realize that this was the one?
It was again, it was just the movement from that bottom right corner going into the center of the frame and forming like that head, like I said, the beak or bill of a bird, if you will. What I really liked about this scene though was the dark and light contrast from the water and sea foam just really taking shape and form. There's just a lot of movement in the scene, which I really like with compositions. I like to see a lot of movement. And here we just have movement all through it, small bubbles, little bubbles, curves. We have all kinds of diagonals and just a lot of visual flow throughout the scene that just really pulls the eye back to the center of the frame.
And then a really relevant question I've just seen come from Don Iron here. Are you concerned or troubled by tangents? But I think one of the things you've done very well in this picture is avoid tangents in a very busy frame, or mostly avoid tangents.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what a tangent is, and then talk about whether you're concerned about them in this frame?
Yeah, so tangents is when you have lines or other objects placed on the corners that almost intersect or block a visual flow, or gaps within the edges. I try to be real mindful of edge control within a scene. Um, I with smaller scenes like this, I really try to pay attention to the tangents. Um, Sometimes, and this may sound weird to some people, sometimes I don't mind certain tangents with certain scenes because sometimes I feel like stuff can become too perfect. And sometimes those imperfections add a little bit of mystery and questioning the scene a little bit more for you to study the details. So I generally speaking, yes, I try to avoid it, but sometimes I, may leave something just for the viewer to maybe study the details a little bit more. Um, with small scenes like this, particularly, because again, you really want the eye to study all the little details in the scene.
And then I see a picture. I see a question from Will here as well.
Mm.
How much of your shot were you thinking about in the moment versus choosing your favorite shot and understanding why you like them better in the post production?
I think you have to you have to have something to work with before we even get to the post processing. And I think here it was just seeing the movement of that seafoam from the very first frame and just being patient, just seeing what it's going to take shape over the next minute or so before this is completely washed away. And I knew there was something there. It's just you don't know exactly what's there until it's in the camera. Sometimes you just know. And this was one of those scenes where I just knew. um, Midpoint through, you can kind of see this composition slowly to start to take place. If you go back, I think maybe two slides, Luke. One more, one more. So right at this point here, you can see that there is something that is coming together. Um, just seeing the movement of the water, you can see that it was just kind of starting to flow a little bit differently, and the foam started taking more shape. So again, just being patient because even at this frame here, I was like, okay, now we got something really cool. And again, you can see the movement throughout the scene. You can see the sweeping lines, and the spiral effect throughout the frame.
Amazing. Sarah, were there any other questions about this frame? Did you see?
Yeah, we have one question. This was actually a bit earlier, but I want to get to this. It's a question from Dale, who DT, I know you had in Namibia with you a few months ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hey,
And he
Dale.
was kind of asking about the choice of the white framing around all of these images. And like, how do you think about a frame around images in general when you're kind of sharing them? Is that just something we did for this presentation? Is that something you think about in general with your photos?
Luke, I'll let you throw the framing part for the presentation.
So for the presentation, much of DT's photos are very dark, and much of the photos in this presentation were particularly dark. And to make them stand out, and where you can, so in a way that you can clearly see the edges of the frame, I put in a white border. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's just
Uh,
trying to make it as easy as possible for people to see the edges of the frame.
yes, I will use borders, white frame borders, in some of my images on my website. Um, Again, it just comes down to how I feel at the time or how the images look with the framing. I'm not opposed to it. I do both, so whatever works. Whatever works and whatever looks good. I say go with it.
So right at the beginning of this webinar, we were showing well, of especially the Oregon coast, we were showing you the sea stacks, and in the redwoods, we were showing people the larger frames of the rhododendrons and the mist and the tall redwood trees. And I think we really wanted to do this webinar, so uh, to give people a real understanding is that of people photographers arrive to a destination and they have these preconceived ideas of what the main photo is. And there's always so much more than that from a destination. Um, and there's nothing wrong with taking those hero shots. David said earlier that he loves the hero images and he always wants to take them himself. But if you keep looking, the same location gives you so much more than just those hero shots. And we wanted to give people ideas and examples of how you can have photos everyone takes, but then you have all of these other photos from a very similar location, and you end up with very different kinds of photos. Um, there's just so much more to see, and I think we're just wrapping up to the end here. We're at 55 minutes, so we're a little bit over time. But fresh compositions rarely come from finding a new place. They come from learning to see familiar places differently and from noticing overlooked details rather than automatically eliminating them as distractions, like the seafoam we just spoke about. DT, is there any other words of wisdom that you wanted to pass on to people after talking today?
Um, I just, again, like I always, stress to everybody I work with, don't be afraid to, try new things. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to look outside the box. Don't be afraid to fail. It happens to all of us. And I think that's part of the creative process. Be patient, give yourself some grace, and, you know, keep exploring and trying new and different things. And it'll all come together, but you just have to have some patience.
Sarah, were there any last questions that people had?
I don't think so. We've got a lot of compliments coming in. If you do have any final questions, make sure to put them in the chat. Um, Otherwise, I think, yeah, most of these are just kind of wrapping it up in comments.
I've got one final question for DT. What is one or two of the places you're headed to in the next year that you're really excited to look at differently?
I could tell you right off the top, definitely would be the Faroe Islands. Um, I feel that the Faroe Islands has a lot to offer. And yes, it's all about big cliffs, big, huge landscape. But I feel that there's a lot of opportunities there for small scenes and some wide scenes that you could just really step outside of the box and get creative with. Definitely, I would say out of all of these, the Faroe Islands. Everything else, I feel that there's a lot of opportunities as well. But I think the Faroe Islands gives a whole new light on how the Faroes can be captured.
Okay, that's amazing. Okay, I think that's it. I haven't seen any more questions come in. I'll leave people on this screen as they exit, and have a lovely day. Have a lovely rest of your week. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, you guys.